Sarah's phone buzzed in the dead of night. The screen lit up, illuminating her face as she rubbed her tired eyes. She knew that sound. It was the ping she had been waiting for, but not the one she had hoped for. Her heart skipped a beat as she saw the message, "We need to talk." 3 words so simple, yet they carried the weight of 1,000 unanswered questions. Weeks of silence, weeks of longing, all condensed into those 4 words. Had she misinterpreted everything? Her mind raced with memories, video calls at midnight, sweet messages exchanged between time zones, plans to visit each other, and endless promises of forever. Yet now the silence was suffocating, and that text seemed to confirm her worst fear, that the distance had eroded everything between them. She hadn't heard from Tom in weeks. No phone calls. No messages. It was as if he had vanished into the void of his life, leaving her clinging to a thread of hope. She stared at the text, trembling as she considered whether she should respond, or let the silence speak louder than words ever could. Was this the end? The beginning of the end? Sarah sat frozen on her bed, still holding the phone that had just shattered her quiet night. She couldn't comprehend the sudden shift. It had been weeks since Tom had spoken to her, weeks of unanswered calls and ignored messages. She thought she understood. She thought she could handle it. But now, those words, "We need to talk," pulled her into a whirlwind of doubt and confusion. Her mind reeled with memories, and she felt a sharp pang of regret for every late-night conversation that had turned into nothing more than a promise, floating in the air, never solidifying into something real. She had tried so hard to believe that the distance wouldn't matter, that love could stretch across the miles without breaking. But now, with those words flashing on the screen, she wondered if she had been fooling herself. Was it all just a game to Tom? Was she just an afterthought in his life? Sarah dropped her head into her hands, feeling the weight of the silence around her. The silence that had grown thicker with each passing day. And now, in this moment, the silence screamed louder than ever. Sarah's phone buzzed again. A new message from Tom, this time only 1 line. "I'm sorry." That was all it said. Her breath caught in her throat. What was he sorry for? For disappearing? For leaving her in the dark for so long? The message seemed hollow, like an afterthought. The apology felt empty, as if it was just a formality to ease his guilt. She had spent the past few weeks imagining their reunion, dreaming of the moment when he would finally explain himself. But this message, this was not the reunion she had hoped for. She stared at the screen, trying to decipher the meaning behind his words, trying to feel the sincerity she so desperately needed. She couldn't tell if the apology was genuine, or just a way to push her away gently, making it easier for him to disappear completely. Sarah felt the weight of the silence again, thicker this time. It was as if he had built a wall, one she couldn't break down. She wanted to call him to demand answers, but she was terrified of what he might say next. She had already waited so long, and she wasn't sure how much more she could take. Sarah had to talk to someone. She couldn't keep all this inside, especially now. Her heart ached as she dialed Emma's number. Emma, her best friend, was the one who had always been there for her, the one who had warned her from the beginning that love over a distance might not survive. The phone rang 3 times before Emma picked up, her voice groggy from sleep. "Sarah? What's wrong?" Sarah felt the tears start to form, her throat tight with emotion. "It's Tom, he texted me. After all this time he finally messages, and it's just I'm sorry." Emma sighed heavily. "I knew this would happen, Sarah." Her voice was laced with concern, but also frustration. "You've been hanging on for so long. I've seen you waiting for him, sacrificing everything, but he's not the one who's been waiting for you. You deserve someone who's there, not someone who just pops up when it's convenient for them." Sarah shook her head, her thoughts swirling. I know. But what do I do now?" Emma's words echoed in her mind long after the conversation ended. She had always thought she could fight for their love, that the distance wasn't a barrier, but now, the cracks were becoming too large to ignore. After the call with Emma, Sarah sank into the silence once again. Her phone sat beside her on the bed, screen still glowing with Tom's message, but it felt like a million miles away. She had tried so hard, given so much of herself to this relationship, but the walls around her heart were beginning to crumble. Every promise Tom had made, every plan they had discussed, now seemed like distant memories, illusions of a love that could never be. The distance between them wasn't just physical anymore, it was emotional too. She wondered if Tom had ever truly understood how much she had sacrificed, how she had poured her heart into a relationship that felt like it was drifting further and further away. The silence between them spoke louder than any words ever could, and the weight of that silence crushed her. Maybe she had been holding on to something that was never meant to last. Maybe she had been the only one trying. She glanced at the phone one more time, then turned it face down on the bed, the glow still visible through the edges of the screen. It felt like the end, but Sarah didn't know how to walk away. Sarah spent the next few days replaying Tom's message over and over in her head. The hollow "I'm sorry" was all she had to hold on to now. It felt like the last thread of their connection, but it wasn't enough. She couldn't shake the feeling that she deserved more, that she had given so much of herself, and was left with nothing but empty words. She kept staring at her phone, waiting for another message, another apology, something that might explain why he had gone silent for so long. She wanted to believe that there was a reason, a legitimate reason for all the broken promises, but deep down, she knew better. She tried to reach out to him, but he didn't reply. The silence was louder than anything he could ever say. Sarah lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, feeling the weight of her own loneliness. She thought about what Emma had said, about how she had been giving everything to someone who wasn't really there. Was Emma right? Had she been blind to the truth all along? The questions swirled around her mind, and all she could do was wait for answers that would never come. The days passed slowly, each one blending into the next. Sarah went through the motions of her life, work, eating, sleeping, but it all felt hollow. Her thoughts were consumed with Tom and the empty space he left behind. She found herself waiting for a sign, any sign that he still cared. She couldn't understand how someone could vanish like that, leaving her with nothing but questions. She checked her phone constantly, hoping for a text, a call, anything that might give her some closure. But there was nothing. The silence weighed on her like a heavy fog, and she began to wonder if she had ever really known him at all. Had everything they shared been real? She thought back to the early days of their relationship, when they were inseparable, talking for hours on end. What had happened to that connection? Had it ever existed, or had it been an illusion she created in her mind? The more she thought about it, the more the uncertainty grew. She was beginning to realize that maybe Tom wasn't the person she thought he was, and maybe she had been fooling herself all along. Sarah finally called Tom again. Her fingers hovered over the screen, unsure whether to dial his number or not. It had been days since their last conversation, and she couldn't take the silence any longer. She needed answers. The phone rang, and her heart raced in her chest. After what felt like an eternity, Tom picked up. "Hello?" His voice sounded distant, detached, like he was somewhere far away, physically and emotionally. Sarah could hear the hesitation in his tone. "Tom, what's going on? Why haven't you been answering my calls?" she asked, her voice shaking with a mix of frustration and hurt. He responded with vague explanations, telling her he had been busy, that he didn't know how to handle things. But his words felt empty, like he was trying to avoid the truth. Sarah could feel her patience wearing thin. She had heard it all before, the excuses, the half-hearted apologies. But this time she was determined to get to the bottom of it. She demanded that he be honest with her, but he kept dodging the real question. Why had he pulled away? The call ended with more uncertainty than Sarah had hoped for. Tom had promised to be more communicative, to try harder, but his words didn't feel convincing. She hung up, her phone slipping from her hand onto the couch. Her mind raced. What had changed? Was he losing interest? She couldn't help but think of the other woman. The rumors Emma had mentioned earlier seemed to weigh on her more now. Sarah couldn't ignore the growing feeling that Tom had moved on without her, even if he wasn't ready to admit it. She had never felt so small, so insignificant. Every memory of their time together, every sweet word, now felt like a lie. She spent the rest of the evening scrolling through her messages with Tom, looking for answers in his words, trying to find something that would make sense of everything. But nothing fit. The more she searched, the emptier she felt. It was like she was trying to piece together a puzzle, but the pieces no longer matched. As the days passed, Sarah began to distance herself from Tom, though it wasn't easy. Her heart still clung to the hope that he would return, that he would realize the mistake he had made. But deep down, she knew it was over. She started focusing on herself more, spending time with friends and doing things that made her feel whole again. Yet, every time her phone buzzed, a small part of her hoped it was him. But it wasn't. She realized she had been waiting for something that wasn't coming. The emotional roller coaster had drained her, and now all she wanted was peace. She no longer felt the urgency to respond to Tom's half-hearted attempts at communication. She had waited long enough, and now it was time to let go. It was painful, yes, but it was the only way forward. She knew that moving on would take time, but for the first time in weeks, she felt like she was taking control of her own life again. Days went by, and Sarah couldn't shake the nagging feeling that Tom was slipping away from her. She had tried to distract herself, but his absence weighed heavily on her mind. Then, one evening, she saw something that made her stomach drop. A picture on social media of Tom and another woman. Her heart raced as she stared at the image. It wasn't just a friend. This was different. She didn't know who the woman was, but the smile on Tom's face told her everything. Sarah felt a pang of jealousy and disbelief. How could he move on so quickly? How could he have replaced her? She kept looking at the picture, hoping it was a mistake, that maybe she was overreacting. But the more she looked, the more the truth sank in. Tom had been hiding something from her, and now it was all out in the open. She felt betrayed and foolish, unable to escape the gnawing feeling that she had been left behind. She called Emma immediately, but her heart was already sinking. "Sarah, don't jump to conclusions," Emma said on the phone. But Sarah could barely listen to her friend's calming words. How could she not jump to conclusions? The image was clear, and the look in Tom's eyes spoke volumes. He had moved on without her, and it hurt more than she could have imagined. She felt like an afterthought, like her love for him had been nothing more than a temporary distraction. The jealousy simmered inside her, along with a deep sense of betrayal. She tried to rationalize it, telling herself that it didn't mean anything, but she knew in her heart that it did. Sarah had given so much of herself to Tom, and now she wondered if it had all been in vain. She wanted to confront him, to demand an explanation, but part of her feared that it wouldn't matter. That maybe he was done with her. And maybe it was time for her to be done with him too. Sarah spent hours staring at the photo of Tom and the woman, unable to tear her eyes away. Every time she tried to distract herself, the image kept coming back, haunting her. She questioned everything. Had Tom ever truly loved her? Or was she just a convenience for him, something to pass the time until he found someone else? The feelings of betrayal and confusion overwhelmed her. She had spent so much time defending him, making excuses for his behavior, and now she realized how blind she had been. She should have seen the signs, the distance growing between them, the lack of effort. But she had been so desperate to hold on to something that wasn't really there. She wondered if she would ever be able to trust anyone again. The doubt that had started as a small seed now grew into a full-blown fear of being left alone once more. The next day, Sarah confronted Tom. The conversation was tense from the start. She couldn't hold back anymore. "Why didn't you tell me about her? Why didn't you tell me you were seeing someone else?" she demanded, her voice shaky but firm. Tom tried to explain, saying it was complicated, that things had happened slowly, and that he didn't know how to tell her. His excuses felt like a slap in the face. She had been waiting for the truth, but now it felt like a cruel game. "How long has this been going on?" she asked, her voice trembling with anger and hurt. Tom hesitated before answering, and when he did, Sarah knew that the answer wasn't just about one woman, it was about the entire relationship. He had been emotionally distant for weeks, if not months. All the signs had been there, but she had refused to see them. And now, it was too late. The conversation ended with more unanswered questions than answers. Tom apologized again, but it felt like too little, too late. Sarah sat in silence after the call ended, staring at the phone in her hands. She didn't know what to do anymore. The hurt, the betrayal, the confusion, it all mixed together, leaving her with a deep sense of loss. She realized that she couldn't keep living like this, waiting for someone who didn't seem to care. Maybe she had been clinging to a version of Tom that didn't exist anymore. It was hard to accept, but she knew deep down that it was time to let go. Letting go felt like a failure, but Sarah knew it was the only way to heal. The weight in her chest felt heavy, but she stood up from the couch, determined to begin the process of moving on. A few days passed since Sarah's confrontation with Tom. She had expected to feel some sense of closure, but instead, the emptiness only grew. That was until one evening when Tom called her. He sounded different, hesitant, remorseful. "Sarah, I need to explain," he said. She listened, her heart pounding as he spoke. He told her the truth, or at least what he claimed was the truth. He had been confused, torn between her and the life he had outside of their relationship. He admitted to seeing someone else, but not in the way she had feared. He was emotionally distant, unsure, and he never meant to hurt her. His words didn't offer the relief she had hoped for. Instead, they made her feel even more foolish. "I didn't know how to tell you," Tom explained, but it only deepened the ache in Sarah's chest. His honesty now felt like another lie. The cracks in their relationship were too deep to fix, and she realized that their story had ended before she even knew it. The truth left Sarah feeling hollow, but at least it was out there. She couldn't help but wonder how much of what Tom had said was true. He had never been good at expressing himself, but now it seemed like every word was a half-truth or an excuse. His apology was still layered with uncertainty, as though he wasn't fully ready to face the consequences of his actions. Sarah felt herself shutting down emotionally, unable to believe in anything he said anymore. She had loved him with everything she had, but now all she had left was the bitter taste of betrayal. She thought about how much she had invested in their relationship, and wondered if it had all been a waste. Was he ever truly the person she thought he was? The pain from the lies and the silence was suffocating, but there was a part of her that felt relief. She could finally move on, even if it meant facing the future without him. Tom's words echoed in Sarah's mind long after the conversation ended. She had hoped for a resolution, for some sort of peace, but instead, she felt more lost than ever. She tried to move on with her day, but every little thing reminded her of him. The way the sun shone through the window, the old songs they used to listen to, the texts she would never receive again. It all seemed like a cruel reminder of what she had lost. She reached out to Emma, needing someone to talk to. Emma listened patiently as Sarah poured out her frustrations, her doubts, and the weight of the pain she was carrying. "It's okay to grieve," Emma said softly. "You gave everything to him, but it's time to take that love and give it to yourself now." Sarah clung to Emma's words, but it wasn't easy. The memories of their love kept pulling her back, and part of her still wished that Tom would fight for her, would fight for them. But Emma was right, she had to let go, no matter how hard it was. The more Sarah reflected, the clearer it became. Tom had never been fully present in their relationship. It wasn't just the silence or the lies, it was his inability to meet her halfway. He had always been emotionally distant, and Sarah had been blind to it because she was so desperate to believe in their love. She had been holding on to a version of him that never truly existed. The truth had been staring her in the face all along, but she hadn't wanted to see it. It was painful, but it was also freeing. She could finally accept that their love was not meant to be. She deserved more than this, more than a man who couldn't commit to her, who couldn't love her the way she needed. Slowly, Sarah began to let go of the hope that Tom would come back. The feelings of betrayal still stung, but she knew deep down that this was the only way forward. It was time to rebuild her life, even if it meant doing it alone. As the days passed, Sarah started to feel more like herself again. She focused on her work, spent time with friends, and started taking better care of herself. It wasn't easy, and there were moments when the sadness crept in, but she refused to let it consume her. She had been through too much to let this be the end of her story. There were days when she still missed Tom, when she remembered the good times, but she knew now that she couldn't keep waiting for someone who didn't prioritize her. Slowly, she began to see the possibilities of her future without him. She wasn't sure where her journey would take her, but she was ready to face it with an open heart, no longer shackled by the past. A month had passed since Sarah had made the difficult decision to let go of Tom. Life had started to feel more manageable, but the emotional scars lingered. One evening, she received a message from him. It was short, but it stopped her heart. "Can we talk?" A wave of dread washed over her. She had spent weeks trying to forget, trying to heal, and now he was back, asking for a conversation. Sarah didn't know what to feel. Part of her was still angry, still hurt by everything he had put her through. Another part of her missed the person she once thought he was. But she knew she had made progress. She wasn't the same girl who had waited for him in silence, longing for his attention. She had found her strength again. Sarah debated whether she should respond, but ultimately she decided she was done waiting for closure from him. She had already found it within herself. "I'm moving on," she typed, her fingers steady as she pressed send. It was hard, but she was finally free. After sending her message, Sarah sat in silence, her heart racing. She wondered if Tom would respond, if he would try to convince her to talk. But a few minutes passed, then an hour. No reply. Sarah felt a strange sense of relief. She realized that she no longer needed his validation. She had spent so long trying to find peace in someone else's words, but now, for the first time in a long time, she felt at peace with herself. The next morning, she went to work, focusing on her tasks and reconnecting with the parts of her life that had been on pause. When she saw her reflection in the mirror, she realized how far she had come. She wasn't the same person she was when she first met Tom. She had grown, learned, and found strength in her own resilience. Tom's message had been a test, and she had passed. She could finally let go, knowing she was worth more than the pain he had caused. Later that evening, Sarah sat with Emma, reflecting on how far she had come. "I didn't think I'd be able to move on," Sarah admitted. "I thought I'd always be stuck in the past, waiting for him to come back." Emma smiled softly, her eyes filled with understanding. "But you didn't, you found yourself again." Sarah nodded, her heart lighter than it had been in months. She realized that everything she had been through had made her stronger. She wasn't waiting for anyone anymore. She had started living for herself. The hurt still existed, but it no longer defined her. Sarah was starting to see the possibilities ahead, not as a continuation of her past, but as a new chapter in her life. One where she controlled her own fate. As weeks passed, Sarah began to explore things she had put on hold during her relationship with Tom. She took up new hobbies, spent more time with family, and even started seeing someone new. It wasn't a serious relationship yet, but for the first time in a long time, she felt like she was living fully. Every day brought new opportunities for growth, and Sarah realized that she didn't need to wait for someone else's approval to be happy. She was enough on her own. One night as she lay in bed, she thought back on everything that had happened. Tom had been a part of her life, but he no longer defined her. She had grown beyond the girl who waited by the phone, the girl who clung to false hope. The woman she had become was strong, independent, and ready for whatever the future held. Sarah sat by the window, staring out at the city lights. She hadn't heard from Tom since their last conversation, and it no longer bothered her. She had moved on, and now she was at peace. There was no more waiting, no more wondering. She had let go of the past, and in doing so, she had made room for new possibilities. For the first time in a long time, Sarah felt whole. She had survived the heartache, and now she was ready to embrace the future. Whatever it brought, she would face it on her own terms. It had been several months since Sarah let go of Tom, and embraced the path of healing. She had transformed in ways she never thought possible. She rediscovered her passions and began to reconnect with parts of herself she had lost in the chaos of the past. Her career was flourishing, and she had started traveling again, something she had always loved but had put on hold for years. Every day felt like a step closer to the person she had always wanted to be. She had learned to love herself in ways she had never known before. When she looked in the mirror now, she saw someone who was whole, someone who had survived heartbreak and come out stronger. Yet, there were still days when memories of Tom lingered, like echoes of a past life. She had moments of weakness, moments when she wished things had turned out differently, but those moments were fleeting. The future was hers to shape now, and she would never go back to who she was before. One afternoon, Sarah received an unexpected message. It was from Tom. Her heart skipped a beat when she saw his name on the screen. He wanted to meet. Sarah hesitated for a moment, unsure whether she should respond. She had spent so much time building herself up, and the thought of reopening old wounds was daunting. But curiosity tugged at her, and she found herself agreeing to meet. "I've moved on," she reminded herself quietly. "I don't need closure from him." But there was a small part of her that needed to see him, to confront the past and prove to herself that she was no longer the girl who had waited for him to return. Sarah knew that this meeting wasn't about him anymore. It was about her. It was about showing herself that she had truly let go. When Tom walked in, Sarah's breath caught for a moment. He looked just as she remembered, handsome but distant. His expression was tentative, unsure of how to approach her. Sarah's heart didn't race like it used to, though. The familiarity was there, but it felt distant, like looking at an old photograph. They exchanged pleasantries before he spoke, his voice shaky. "I wanted to apologize for everything," he began. "I know I hurt you. I was selfish and confused." His words were sincere, but Sarah had heard them before. She listened quietly, letting him speak his truth. When he finished, there was a long silence. Sarah took a deep breath, feeling a quiet sense of calm wash over her. She wasn't angry anymore. She had been angry for so long, but now, it was as if that anger had melted away. "I'm glad you're sorry," Sarah said softly, "but I've already forgiven you. And most importantly, I've forgiven myself." The conversation drifted to lighter topics, catching up on what they had been up to, where life had taken them. Sarah listened, but her mind wasn't fully engaged. She realized that the person sitting across from her wasn't the Tom she had once known. He was a stranger now, someone who had become a chapter in her past, not her future. She no longer needed his presence to feel validated or loved. She had built her own life, and it was enough. As they parted ways, Tom tried to give her a hug, but Sarah gently declined. "Take care of yourself," she said, offering him a small, polite smile. She didn't need his approval anymore. She was free. Later that evening, Sarah reflected on the meeting. She felt a quiet sense of closure. Not because Tom had apologized, but because she had finally let go of the emotional weight he had carried for so long. She had needed that final moment to face the past, to see him one last time, and realize that it didn't matter anymore. She was stronger now. The person she had been when she first met Tom was gone, replaced by someone who knew her worth. Sarah knew that her journey wasn't over, that life would continue to bring challenges, but she was ready for them. She had faced the hardest part, letting go. And now, she could fully embrace the future, whatever it may hold. Weeks had passed since Sarah's final meeting with Tom, and she had settled into a new rhythm of life. She had rediscovered joy in the little things, coffee with friends, long walks through the park, moments of silence that no longer felt empty. But even with all the progress she had made, there was one final thing that haunted her. A memory. A thought that lingered just at the edges of her mind. Tom's name. It was the last thing she saw every time she looked at her phone. It wasn't just the reminder of the past, but a symbol of everything she had let go. The chapter had ended, but there was still a feeling of unfinished business. Sarah smiled softly to herself, realizing that she had finally reached a place where she could be at peace. She had let go of the pain, the anger, and the hope that Tom would come back. And now, even though his name no longer lit up her phone, she was okay. A month later, Sarah was walking through the park when she bumped into an old acquaintance, Mark, a man she had met a few years ago at a work event. They hadn't spoken in a long time, but as they chatted, Sarah realized something. The connection between them was light, easy, and genuine. She wasn't looking for a relationship, not yet, but she appreciated the simplicity of the conversation. It was refreshing to talk to someone who didn't carry the weight of past heartbreak or confusion. Mark wasn't Tom. And in that moment, Sarah realized that she didn't need anyone to complete her. She was complete on her own. He asked if she wanted to grab coffee sometime, and Sarah, with a smile, said yes. She wasn't rushing into anything, but the idea of opening herself up to someone again felt like a step forward. The days grew warmer, and Sarah's life continued to unfold in ways she hadn't anticipated. She didn't feel the need to force anything, not relationships, not work, not even the next step in her journey. For the first time in a long time, she felt in control. She was becoming someone who knew her worth and wasn't afraid to stand up for it. When she thought about Tom now, it was with a sense of understanding. The pain had been real, but it no longer defined her. It had become a part of her story, not the whole story. She was writing the next chapters now, and each one was filled with hope, growth, and the quiet knowledge that she could handle whatever life threw her way. The future was bright, and for the first time in years, Sarah was no longer waiting for someone else to fill the space inside her. One night, Sarah sat by her window, looking out at the city lights. There were no more unanswered calls from Tom, no more late-night texts that filled her with longing. She had moved on. And in doing so, she realized she had given herself the greatest gift of all: freedom. She no longer lived in the shadow of what could have been, but in the light of what was now possible. She was proud of the woman she had become, the woman who had faced heartache, learned from it, and emerged stronger. There would still be challenges ahead, moments of doubt, but she knew she would face them with strength. As she stared out into the city, a thought crossed her mind. Maybe this is the moment I've been waiting for all along. Not for someone else to come and fill the void, but for herself to step fully into the life she was meant to live. The phone buzzed. Sarah glanced down, expecting the usual notifications: work, friends, family. But then she saw it. A message from Tom. Her heart skipped a beat. It was brief, just a simple, "How are you?" Sarah stared at it for a long moment. It was tempting, she thought, to respond, to let the past creep back in. But then she realized something. The past was behind her, and the person who would reply to that message wasn't the same person who had been left in the dark months ago. Oh! She smiled, feeling the final weight of Tom's absence lift completely. He never realized the last message he ignored was her goodbye. That was the end of it. Sarah placed her phone down, stood up, and walked toward the window. The city was still there, glowing softly in the distance. And for the first time in a long time, Sarah didn't feel the need to wait for anything anymore. The world was hers to explore,